Okay, so what exactly is artificial intelligence? Well, artificial intelligence is the simulation of human intelligence so that you can't tell the difference between a human and a machine. And we tend to think about intelligence as something like IQ, just to do with the brain. But actually, as humans, we are intelligent in multi dimensions. So we can do all kinds of things. We can move, we can run, we can jump, we can backflip, or some of us can. We can see, we can interpret what we see. We're very good at recognizing faces. We're very good at recognizing voices. We can hear, we can do all sorts of things. So it's not just a question of whether you can think, whether you can plan, whether you can take decisions. That we're intelligent in multiple ways. Now, Frank and Stella were very kind to us today. They took us to Bletchley Park, which of course is home. It's very well associated with Alan Turing, who is the father, considered the father of artificial intelligence, and also who came up with something called the Turing test. Now, the Turing test, if you read about what the Turing test actually is online, there's a slightly sort of sanitized version of it online, but basically the less politically correct version of what Turing, of the Turing test, which is, can someone imitate someone else, is a man communicating with a woman, not verbally, because that would actually give away that they were talking to a woman. And then could you substitute the woman for either another man or an artificially intelligent system, and the first man wouldn't be able to tell the difference. Now that imitation is clever in a number of ways, because if you think about it, the man who thinks he's talking to a woman, but the man who's substituting for that woman has got to impersonate a woman or what he thinks of as that woman, and the artificially intelligent system has also got to impersonate. And when you impersonate someone, and he's not impersonating another man, he's impersonating a woman. So there's a kind of double impersonation going on. And that requires you to really understand how somebody else thinks, how somebody else might talk, how somebody else might interpret the world. And that is actually a very, very, very difficult thing for any system, any artificially intelligent system to do. So once we get to that level of intelligence, then I think we can truly say there is a super race of beings that are being created. But as I think I hope to show you, I think we're a very long way from that. Now, the problem with that Turing test, my son actually does work for a company called DeepMind, so he is an AI expert. And as he pointed out, the problem with that. The problem with the Turing test. It's all right, we're in football, it's fine. Now, the problem with the Turing test is that you would test that artificial intelligence system's ability to impersonate someone else, to have some kind of theory of mind, which means that they can understand another person. But could that system also make a cup of tea? And Turing didn't specify that was actually part of the Turing test, but actually it should be, because as humans we can do all these things. We don't just think about things. We don't just decide or plan or see or hear. We also make cups of tea, and we do lots of practical things as well, which all contribute to our intelligence. Okay, now I'm using the clicker. I think this is juice. Sorry, John. Okay. Now I mentioned the Reef lectures and Professor Stuart Russell at the beginning, and here's a quote actually from his first Reef lecture, the first one he gave on what is AI, because there are actually two types of AI, and I think this is quite an important thing to understand. And don't worry about the words. I'll explain them because you may not have heard of things like AlphaGo. But basically, you have narrow AI, which is where you get systems to do a very, very narrow, specific range of things, just one thing, perhaps. So the system becomes very, very good at doing one thing. And then you've got general AI, where the system becomes good at doing multiple things. Now, going back to what I was saying about human beings, we are examples of general intelligence. We have general intelligence because we can do thousands of different things, maybe not simultaneously, and some of us are better at multitasking than others, and of course I won't say who, but you know, we are generally intelligent. So this is the holy grail of the Turing test, and most AI systems, and AI is everywhere today, but most AI systems are very, very, very narrow. So Professor Russell talked about a very famous artificial intelligence system called AlphaGo, which was developed by this British company DeepMind. I don't know if any of you have heard of DeepMind. It's now owned by the parent company of Google, and it's probably, I think it's considered the top AI research company in the world. My son describes it because he says it's like being an academic on a Google salary. So very nice if you can get that kind of work. So they came up with a program that can beat the very best players of the world of the Korean game Go. Now, Go is reputed to be far more complex than chess. So when they created AlphaGo, obviously this was a step beyond some of the artificial intelligence systems that can play chess and have been able to play chess against the grandmasters for a long time. This actually could take on the Koreans and win. However, as Professor Russell pointed out, it can't remember anything. So actually, it learns how to play Go, and then you switch it off. And when you go back 20 minutes later and switch it back on again, it has to learn all over again how to play Go. No memory. Whereas Google is an example with their search algorithm is also artificially intelligent. And you can find anything you want on Google, but of course it can't plan, and it certainly can't make a cup of tea. So this is a distinction I'd like to sort of help you with.
Hey!
I reckon it's your fingers. They're more intelligent than mine. Okay, so how do you actually make a machine intelligent? Well, basically, how do you become intelligent? How does a baby become intelligent? And it all starts with the fact that the baby is subject to a lot of data through its, well, first of all, through its mouth, through its sucking and its taste, and then it's exploring the world, the touch, and then through senses, through seeing, and so on. And gradually, all that data starts to make sense to the baby. The baby starts to model it. It starts to create models, and we all look at the world through models. We all model the world, and whether you're playing the piano, whether you're a pilot, whatever you're doing, you are building up a model of the world. Now, in an artificially intelligent situation, what you build is a mathematical model. You amass a lot of data that you're going to train your model on, and then you create a mathematical model of that data. So to help the artificially intelligent system make sense of that data. And then you get the model to make some predictions. Okay, how good is the model? And you test that by saying, well, how well can it predict that something will happen according to its model? And of course, we all do that. Again, we all get our models are better and better because we think, I think something like that's going to happen. And when it does, you think, right, now, okay, so my model is correct in that respect. Or you test, well, maybe if I chop down the tree in this way, I learned that it actually falls that way. Okay, I'm improving my model. So feedback is really essential to this. You get feedback, and then that augments your data. And so the next time round, when you run your model, you've got more data, your model improves, and there's a nice feedback. And that's exactly how you train a machine to be artificially intelligent. Do I dare?
You can do it.
Hey! Finally, only 6 slides in. Okay. So what is this data? What's the data that that you amass or you collect for an artificially intelligent system to work on? Right. Well, this data comes from everywhere, and in fact, probably quite a lot of you are already training an artificial intelligence system, and you don't know you're doing it. So, for example, you all know from using apps on your mobile phone, of course, every single app will be collecting data about you. And in fact, Apple, or whoever you supplies your either your network or your handset, will be collecting data on where you are, what you're doing, what you like, what apps you're using, what time of day you're interacting. So tons of data is being collected by you from surveillance cameras. You know, all the cameras are learning all the time now to recognize faces. So they're going to have AI built into them so that they can start doing facial recognition. If you've got one of those doorbells, that's collecting data about who's coming to your door, what time you're in, did you answer the door or didn't you answer the door, and making inferences as a result of that data. Robot vacuum cleaners, they're mapping your house. They know what furniture you've got where. And all this data goes back, and someone's collecting it, because you may have heard the phrase, data is the new oil. Data is money and it's power. So all of these are examples of what are collecting data from your smart meter. Soon we're going to have intelligent fridges. They're going to know what food's inside. And Sainsbury's is very, very keen on getting hold of that information. So are insurance companies, because obviously they want to know, you know, whether you've got the, you know, how many cans of beer you've got in there as opposed to salad leaves. You know, that's quite useful information. The one I like best is I was reading about a very interesting little company that is, they've got, you know, these self-checkouts, they've got cameras on the self-checkouts, and the customers come along and weigh, say, some apples. And then put in apples, you know, you have to go and put in apples, and then it tells you the weight and how much it's going to cost. Well, that's actually being collected by this company and used to train the AI behind it to recognize apples. Because the AI doesn't know that those are apples. And actually having to train, I'll get on to how the amount of data that's needed for training, just for simple things like apples. You know, that actually training that offline, as it were, without the human showing the apple, that would take quite a long time and a lot of money. So why don't you get the human customers to actually train the AI for you? Tell the machine over and over again, no, this is not an orange potato. This is actually a sweet potato. And you are training, and this is going to happen, and is already happening, actually, in a lot of circumstances. So all this data is being collected all the time by people who want to use it for artificially intelligent purposes. And this kind of machine learning needs a lot of data. Now you can instantly look at this and say they're all teacups. They're all cups for drinking tea, right? An AI system can't do that at first. An AI system would have to be trained probably for several thousand hours. Well, that's pretty simple. A teacup, maybe not that, maybe it wouldn't take that long, but something more complex, a more complex system could take thousands of hours to actually train the system, to actually understand, you know, all the variations of an object or an environment in the world. And you can overtrain them as well. So if, for example, you only showed the artificial intelligence system blue teacups, then it wouldn't be able to distinguish a red teacup, because as far as it was concerned, it wasn't a teacup. So they're not that intelligent really, and they take a lot of training. And AI is really only, those models I talked about are only as good as the humans have created them and the objectives that the humans have had. And I put this up as a deliberate caricature. My son doesn't like it, but you know, hey, he's not here. But it's a caricature, right? Because nobody is going to create a model that would actually ask somebody to do something illegal or support somebody doing something illegal. Well, at least on the web, maybe on the dark web, But a really good example of a bad AI model and a bad objective is target advertising. Target advertising says to you, you are the most important person in the world. So what do you want? And I'll give it to you. And so it's really creating a world of toddlers. So if you're a murderer, you come along and you say, well, I want to learn about killing someone, and target advertising, it has no concept of right and wrong. It just says, okay, you're a murderer. Well, look at all the things that other murderers have bought. As I say, it's a caricature because actually models are, they tend to sort of screen out or filter out the murderers. But what they didn't filter out in the early days were people showing kids images of people with anorexia, or if you wanted to commit, this is how you commit suicide, really terrible things like that. And it's only public pressure that have got the companies that have this target advertising to refine their models, change their models so that this kind of content isn't shown. However, there is still a bad objective here in saying we will give you everything that you want, because there's very good research to show that societies are most innovative, most creative, most stable when they are diverse and they're inclusive, and you have people who have got who respect a wide diversity of opinion. But the problem with this kind of target advertising, we're going to give you what you want, is that you push people into a corner. You only show them the content that they say they want. So they never come across any other views, and they never come across any other points, opinions, and so on. And so what happens is you get a lot of people who are tribal, and then you can get some very bad consequences from that. And we've seen this. I mean, I think we do see this all the time, and I think there's a growing awareness that this is a bad model. Now, having said that, AI and machine learning can also be put forward to a lot of very good uses. So, for example, that Fitbit data that's being collected about you, your medical data that's being collected about you, when handled properly and collected together, the artificial intelligent machines can handle a lot of data. They don't get tired and bored like we do. So they are able to very quickly look for patterns, look for anomalies very much faster than we are able to do as humans, which means that they start to spot things quicker than we do, and could actually, there's evidence to show that artificially intelligent systems can be really good, for example, at spotting symptoms, far better than human clinicians in many cases. And then there's a case of, again, if you heard in the news, DeepMind came up with a way of assessing how protein, it's called protein folding, how proteins fold. Now, we're all made up of proteins, and it's very important that you know how these protein, the shape of the protein affects its function. So it's very important to understand how proteins fold. And it's been a very, very difficult area for humans to crack. So actually now an artificially intelligent system that DeepMind has developed can do that very, very, very quickly. And as a result, so the whole of the COVID vaccines, for example, depended on understanding this protein folding thing. And I don't know very much about protein folding, but I do know that new vaccines, new drugs, and so on are going to be based on it. So it's a very, very important development. And so on and so forth. Industrial process automation. There's an awful lot of waste in industrial processes. So if you can, for example, if you're a textile company and you're printing textiles and you want to make sure the machine is aligned, you don't want to waste thousands of pounds printing out lots of material only to find that actually the machine's been set wrong. If you can get an artificially intelligent system to see that very, very quickly, then you can save a lot of money. And this is again another big area for AI. Environmental monitoring, we're going to be able to model a lot more about the environment and a lot more about what's going wrong with the environment, and also hopefully be able to counter that quickly, and so on and so forth. The bottom one's quite interesting, task automation, because what artificially intelligent systems will be able to do is actually cut out a lot of boring, repetitive tasks, potentially. But this also has an impact on the future of work. And actually, Stuart Russell's lecture on the future of work is really, really interesting and thought-provoking. So task automation is a little bit of a double-edged sword, I feel, because a lot of automation has already taken away blue-collar jobs, and there's a threat that artificially intelligent systems could also take away white-collar jobs. And then what do we all do for a living? So that's all now. Those are all narrow AI systems. So they can only do one thing. They can only look at protein folding, or they can only play a game. They can only focus on looking for a particular kidney disease, or they can look at they can understand that an industrial process is going out of kilter. So they're only doing one narrow thing. So let's look at the state of the art with artificial general intelligence. And the reason it's important to understand that is because as I said, artificial general intelligence is what could eventually end up with some kind of iRobot or some kind of super being that's going to take away the planet from us. And I think that's what people are afraid of. So actually, the models to do with artificial general intelligence are getting smarter, and this is the area of research that DeepMind is focusing on. So I mentioned AlphaGo at the beginning. That's already superhuman. That can already play Go better than any human. And then they came up with AlphaZero. Now AlphaZero can start. So AlphaGo had to be trained by humans. AlphaZero doesn't need training by humans. It can just start off with a lot of data and then teach itself how to play chess, Go, and another game I've never heard of called shogi. And then there's then there are new models, new artificially intelligent models that can play multiplayer games. So they don't just play single player games, but multiplayer games, and they can start playing those as well. So they're starting to do more than one thing. And the thing that really trips artificial intelligent systems up, though, is mobility. So there are systems that can learn how to teach themselves how to walk and to run, but actually most robots at the moment have very limited mobility. They can know an industrial environment or a dangerous environment. They can know it up to a certain point, but actually, if they go outside that what they've been exposed to and trained on, then they don't know what to do. Then they start falling over and doing erratic things. Now, there is a very, very clever model of language called GPT-3. And that model teaches itself from the web, from digital books, from Wikipedia. It has a really comprehensive understanding of language. So much so that if you wrote the first line of a poem, it could produce a poem that a lot of people wouldn't be able to tell whether that was a machine or a human that had written that poem. Or if you gave it a first few prompts in a call center script, it could produce a pretty good conversation with a customer. So that is starting to become quite intelligent. And then I mentioned that, of course, most artificial intelligence systems don't have any memory. They certainly don't have stream of consciousness, like the little voices that go on in our head all the time that join us from past to present. But we're beginning to see agents that can remember, that can follow another agent, and another artificial intelligence system can start to follow it and do what it does, and then when it disappears, it can still remember how to do that. Now that is pretty clever stuff, because it doesn't need training. It's just copying, and that's what we do as humans. We don't need to be trained. We can just copy. If I wave at you, you can wave at me back. There's no training involved in that. So that starts to be quite intelligent but it can only do this very simply. So it can play hide and seek, for example. Well, we're not at a level where it can do all these amazing things: play games, play hide and seek, plan a holiday, make a cup of tea. It's not yet. Nobody yet knows how to put all of those things together. So that's quite reassuring. So I asked my son, I said, well, how far in the future are we going to get artificially generally intelligent systems that can do all these things? And he said, well, it could be 10 years, it could be 100 years. Nobody knows. Nobody knows how to put all these systems together. They're all discrete at the moment. Even the most clever, superhumanly artificial general intelligence systems are still pretty narrow in scope, and they still can't make a cup of tea. Mm-hmm. So, whether, as I say, I think we've got from science fiction, we have in our heads, these malicious robots. We have HAL, and we have iRobot, and we have the woman in Ex Machina, and we also have lovely ones like C3PO and R2D2. But we're still a very long way off from them becoming a reality. Now, it may be that as we have lots and lots and lots and lots of narrow AIs, we're going to have AI everywhere. I think there's a general consensus in my industry that everything that can be connected will be connected to the internet by 2030. And that means and everything's going to have AI. Everything's starting to have AI in it. I've showed you the list of all the things that are going to be that are already AI enabled, and there are going to be even more. And they're all going to run in this in the cloud. Now, I didn't mention the cloud. I showed it on a previous slide. But actually, when all this data is collected, where is it collected? It's collected in this place called the cloud. And those of you, you've heard, I'm sure you've heard of the cloud because there's iCloud and so on. What is the cloud? Actually, the cloud is massive data centers, really massive data centers. So big that they often require a huge amount of energy. All the Instagrams, all the TikTok videos, all the data, all the YouTube videos, and all the industrial data is all collected in these data centers, which, quite frankly, if you think about every time you do a Google search, and remember that you're burning a little bit more of the planet. Because quite often these data centers they have massive power requirements. They run very hot, and they're being sunk into the sea. They're put into the Arctic. Google's got massive ones in the Arctic because they've got to be kept so cool. And this is one of the drawbacks. This is, I think, one of the drawbacks of AI is that it requires all this data, and all this machinery, if you like, to store that data, to process that data. So really, can we get to a stage where the AI isn't so costly to us and to the planet? However, if there's AI everywhere, maybe some of these systems will start talking to one another, and maybe they'll start emerging. There'll be some kind of emergent behaviour that possibly could come from all these systems talking to one another, and they'd all become much more intelligent over time. But again, nobody really knows. So to me, I think, in conclusion, I think, that some of the very big benefits we're going to get in terms of being able to optimize things, be able to optimize lives, our health, the way we live. If it's done in a planet-friendly way, and of course there's a lot of technology that's development that's going on around new energy sources, making everything far more energy efficient, much more sustainable. I think these could be very, very good developments for humankind. I think that we can learn what's going wrong and what's bad about using AI at the moment, for example, in this whole example of target advertising, and apply pressure, as people have done, to make the companies doing this more responsible in what they're doing. And there probably will be pressure actually from governments and regulatory bodies on that. So I think overall, and given that there isn't really yet, I don't think, a sort of an artificially generally intelligent creature that's going to come and take over anytime soon. I feel that this, I'm more on the side of it's a friend rather than a foe. However, I do think, that there are some challenges ahead, and we have got to keep a very close eye on these things, and we probably have got to do quite a lot of development, of thinking around how ethical can this be, and what are the consequences if we get it wrong. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and please let me know.
Does anyone have any questions?
Well, that's good. Just imagine a case of that. Put this together with views into the future. Imagine that the best judge in the United Kingdom was actually an artificial intelligence creature that was created from the entire, all of the law books, all of the case history going back, all of the laws that we published. So the best judge in the land. But isn't the issue that remains in this, how would you ever trust the likes of Donald Trump, American political history, and even English history? How could we ever trust somebody, trust a judge, not a somebody, an AI intelligence, to actually be the best judge and to give it credit as part of some sort of judgment, as part of our political and law history?
Well, it depends whether we actually give that system the power to be that judge, to be the arbiter. I think what could happen is that you would certainly be able to help inform those decisions by because you'd have all that knowledge available. So perhaps that would help the human judge to actually have that at their fingertips, all that wealth of knowledge, and then be able to still give the actual decision making to the human. I think that sort of augment human, so that you could either say, well, there's going to be human replacement with artificial intelligence systems, or you could say there's going to be human augmentation with artificially intelligent systems. And I think that's up to us as a society to decide what we want. And I would prefer the model personally, where you would actually say, okay, so all that's going to happen. I mean, I'm sure that's happening now in terms of legal knowledge is being amassed, and in fact, the legal profession is going to be one that could well be disrupted by artificial intelligence. But are we going to give our judgment over to a system, to the equivalent of a HAL computer, or are we going to get a judge that we say, look, you can be aided because you know what the case law has been, and so that will give you some guidance.
So
ultimately always have the veto of that.
Well, if we decide to do that as a society, and I think that's why we've got to be aware of this technology and what it can do and what the consequences are, because it's up to us to decide, how it's going to be used.
Do you think that resolves the hell scenario that multiple data points that conflict with one another, where a computer is expected to make a decision and can't do it? Does one handball it to Ian Buchanan as the global lord to resolve the problem?
I'd like to.
Yeah, well, I think really the alternative. I think that's why I think this emergent scenario is quite interesting, because what happens if all of these things become intelligent without us almost noticing, and they all start talking to one another, and they all make a bid to take over, like how?
They disagree.
And they disagree, and they, yes, I mean, then things could happen. But I think, as I say, I think we've got to be very mindful of that. And part of the reason for having these kind of scenarios and gaming them and so on is to say,
we don't let them get power.
no, we don't let them get power.
I mean, my observation would be that in this kind of scenario, my observation would be we actually more to fear from ourselves. I think if people would abdicate their responsibility, they'd be more than happy to let the machine make the decision, even though the machine is actually not well placed to do so. I mean, the self-driving cars is a great example. These people who are, they're reading the newspaper driving a Tesla, which doesn't even claim to be a self-driving car. It's just got some driver assistance systems, but people take the brain off and they turn the brain off and let it, well, look after me. So I think it's not a case of, I think people will let this happen, the dangerous people let it happen, or even want it to happen, rather than try and step in and say, oh, the machine's not, it's not capable of making that kind of judgment. And something like driving a car, I mean, computers are really bad at that sort of stuff.
Exactly, they can't see, they can't tell a puddle from a piece of ice on the road.
I'm quite happy to say, no, not my problem.
No, I completely agree with you, and that's why I'm really glad to see so many people come out to actually listen to something which could be considered quite an abstruse and technical subject. And in my career, I found that I tell people what I do, and they immediately switch off or say how boring, But actually, I think it is fundamentally, we're moving into a technology age, and if we don't understand the technology, I must say that I am very heartened by the fact that young people do understand the technology. And I think young people, because they understand the technology, are going to be, far better in terms of, questioning whether the machine should take over, quite frankly. And you see this now with the Gen Z, who actually understand the importance of their data, are actually far more worried about what happens to their data than slightly older people quite often, and they don't sort of abnegate it and say, yeah. I have some hope there that this is not going to happen, but I do absolutely agree with you that it's up to us.
We'll shift the subject away from morality. You're talking about machines potentially joining up and learning. Is there any projects going on that are trying to beat that down so that we control it before it happens? Are people trying? The logical thing to do is, if you want a general system, you take the narrow system, you put a system in the middle, and hook them up. Is someone like DeepMind working on that?
Well, I'm not sure they actually know how to do it at the moment, but they are getting closer to understanding what they might have to do. Now, interestingly, one of the investors in DeepMind is very afraid of artificially generally intelligent machines. And one of the reasons he's investing in DeepMind is because, not that this couldn't happen, but if this is going to happen, I want to be in control. Oh, I want to know. I don't want the Chinese to get there first, or heaven help us, the Russians. Yeah. Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, everyone on the planet is working on this at the moment, and got their top people on it, and it's a highly competitive industry. You know, so yes. I mean, the other thing I think though is that if we think about it a little bit less with less emotion, you know, every generation is smarter than the generation that's come before, because there's, you know, the sum of knowledge just gets bigger and bigger, and so that's what happens. We culturally transmit that, and we stand on shoulders of giants, as is often said. And we don't understand really how humans make decisions. We don't really understand how humans are intelligent, actually, and yet we have no problem. You know, if I'm flying a plane, I remember the very early days of fly-by-wire planes. You know, bear in mind my first job was at British Aerospace. I was doing computer programming there. I knew how computer programs were written. I knew how that they were going into the aircraft. And I, for a very long time, wouldn't fly on a fly-by-wire plane. I still don't do internet banking because I've written too many reports on internet security, and I know that, you know, if you ask the bank, well, the banks play this risk. You see, that if you ask the bank to be totally secure with your money, then it will cost them too much money. So they take the risk. It's a risk calculation. So I don't play that game with that back. I'm a Luddite when it comes to that. But so I think, you know, but I trust a pilot. You know, I'm trusting something. I'm trusting the plane. I'm trusting the pilot. And I think there may be an element that we actually do get, not, you know, it's not just an abrogation like you said, but we actually get more used to the idea that we're going to that the machines, well, if they can do it, we trust them enough, you know, and they're not going wrong and they're not mucking things up. You know, maybe we'll just come to some kind of arrangement, yeah, or just, you know, just accept it.
So do you think we still have the hell scenario is switch the damn thing off?
Actually, that's exactly what Stuart Russell said. You know, everything that you create, that at the end of the day, your objective has to be, you know, to the machine, you're doing this for the benefit of the human.
Yeah.
And as long as you've got that as an objective, including switch yourself off.
Yeah.
Right, you're not being beneficial anymore. Then that's the ultimate.
Okay,
Yeah. As long as you've got a kill button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, how much do you see that any of our forces use AI now, i.e. Army, Navy, Air Force?
As I say, I'm not an AI expert, but you can't fly a drone without some kind of AI going on. It's been trained to do something. So I'm pretty sure that, and we know there are intelligent weapons. And actually, Stuart Russell, one of his lectures is all about the use of AI in war. And I think that is one of the more terrifying ones. And so I'd recommend you listen to that because it is one of the more terrifying scenarios. But yes, the military is a very, very, very big user of AI, or very big investor in AI. And again, it's an arms race thing. You know, if we don't do it, then other people are going to use it against us.
So at what point does an AI machine become conscious?
Never. Well, again, we don't know. I mean, I was amazed actually that they have no memory. You know, let alone a stream of consciousness, let alone a theory of mind. However, theory of mind, which is when you understand, which I think humans get to when they're about 3. And that's when you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes and understand that somebody else is different from you and has a different opinion and is a different person. There are no machines that have that at the moment. And that's why that goes back to the Turing imitation game. You know, that's why that was his holy grail of an intelligent machine. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't anything that has that theory of
It
mind.
was
or that
smarter than a
capability.
3-year-old.
Yeah, it's smarter than a 3-year-old. Well, you know, the state of the art that my son's doing at the moment is to get an intelligent agent that can remember how to go around about 12 or 13 different things in a course. And that's breakthrough. And I'm thinking, yes, you've worked on this for 5 years. They didn't like you saying that.
Or it says I can't be asked. Anyone else?
You say that data is the new oil, and really all machine learning systems rely on data. Garbage going in, so it's garbage coming out.
Yeah.
I guess it's whether it's a comment or a question. In the NHS, one of the good things about the NHS is you've got vast amounts of data, good quality data. So in healthcare, how does the NHS actually get value for that millions of barrels of oil that it's got? How does it actually kind of it's a pretty commercial company that's basically trying to get all of that data.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. And in fact, DeepMind got into a lot of trouble because it was working with one of the London hospitals on a data set, and people found out about it and said, you know, what are you doing? You know, you've given that data to a commercial company. So it is highly sensitive data. On the other hand, you're right. I mean, there's tons of data. I mean, it's got one of the probably the best data set in the world in terms of medical data. I think because of these kinds of questions, at the moment, there's been a kind of gold rush. Sorry, I'm mixing my metaphors, data's the new oil, gold rush and so on. But there has been a sort of gold rush for data, and we've allowed big companies, particularly Google, Amazon, Facebook, those kinds of companies, to collect data. You know, Google has very deliberately gone into spaces where nobody thought about sending a car around countries and photographing everything and building a huge data set like Street View. And by the way, while it was collecting all that information about our houses and where they were and what they looked like, it was also collecting people's Wi-Fi addresses. And it got wrapped over the knuckles by the EU for doing that. So it's collecting, these companies collect as much data as they possibly can in any way that isn't regulated. And they want that data because it is so highly valuable, and they can use it for the target advertising, all the bad stuff, I say. So I think people are becoming more and more conscious about their data. I think older people already are quite concerned about privacy and data. And then there was a bunch of people, a bunch of younger people who weren't that bothered, you know, as long as they got the free service. I mean, I'm always quite shocked at my kids who want to, you know, who encourage us to do this 23andMe DNA. I don't want anyone to have my DNA, thank you, you know, who I don't know. And then I think there's younger people still who now realize that their data is valuable. How do we monetize it? And I think what's going to happen, if you look at some of the things that Tim Berners-Lee, who created the World Wide Web, Tim Berners-Lee is doing, is he is trying to set up a system at the moment where people can choose to monetize their data, to make their data, it's not going to be freely available. You decide what you're going to do with data. And I think when we get more sort of sophisticated regimes in like that, I think maybe we can start, you know, really maximizing the value of that kind of data. Sorry, I haven't done this rather than you.
With war in mind, I hadn't realised that the cloud is this entity which is scattered about the world. How vulnerable is the cloud to sabotage? And how protected is it? Is it multiples of the same information, or is it all holding different pockets.
Well, it depends on whose cloud. Now, there are three very big clouds in the world that hold most company data. And so these are sort of general clouds, and they're run by Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. And then there are lots and lots of, each company may, not all the big companies will also have a private cloud, so they have something on their premise. And then there are the clouds where you have, so Facebook or Netflix or those kinds of companies also will either have their own clouds, or they will use either Microsoft or Amazon or Google, one of those clouds, to store things in. However, each of the very big clouds, the Amazon cloud, it has data centers all over the world, and the data can be replicated. Of course, you don't necessarily want the data replicated. If you're in the EU, for example, if you're in Germany, there are very strict rules about replicating that data. It's got to stay in the country. So I think, again, this is an emerging technology area that people are looking at the geopolitical security of their data, how their data is being protected. You see, if you put it in a big cloud like Amazon, if you're a British business and you put it in a big, you put your data, your company data, your customer data, for example, living in somebody else's cloud, somebody else's data center, then what could happen is that if the American government wants to get hold of it, then they can just ask that cloud owner to give them all the data. So I think that this is, again, another emerging area. The whole security of data is another very big area.
But people like Apple have refused to do that, right?
Yes, they have. Yes, they have. And in fact, we are covered by GDPR rules here as well, which means that actually the big companies, the Amazon and Google, they have to act responsibly. Otherwise, nobody would give them any business.
I work for a very large multinational, and just getting all of our own data centers
Yeah.
is too much money.
Yeah.
So we've, I don't know who we're with.
Yep.
But there's 300,000 people in the company, and we now outsource with that.
Yes, yeah, a lot of companies are doing that now. Yes, and I think, again, the implications of that are still being worked out. But these companies are pretty secure in terms of their data. They have to be, otherwise they couldn't get any business. The problem is more about the resilience, and I think to your point about war and geopolitical instability, or people being able to cut cables. Physically things can happen, which means that if you're trying to get access to that data could just, you could just be cut off from that data. And that, I think, is a real concern.
When you deal with Salesforce, you're backed up 3 times around the world.
Yeah.
So you can always access if something goes wrong. So
well, hopefully that's the case.
Well, that's what's supposed to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So, anyone else?
Any more questions? What effect do you think that quantum computing is going to have on the whole thing?
Well, we were just talking about security.
We all avoided that question.
Well, we were just talking about security, weren't we? I was talking to the head of network research at BT last year, and we were on Zoom, and he picked up a piece of fiber network, which is the fiber cable, of course, is what all communications ultimately go across. And he bent it, and he said, "Do you see light coming from this?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "That's data leaking out of the fiber cable." Ooh. So he said, "We already know." It's BT, we already know that there are bad agents that tap into our fiber network, and they're siphoning off all the data. Now, all the data is encrypted, so all the data from the big banks, it's all encrypted, but it's encrypted using an algorithm that will be cracked by quantum computing. We know that. And so they're just siphoning it off till the day comes that quantum computers get viable enough. And they are becoming, more and more viable. So what they're now building is quantum security into the networks so that this can't be cracked.
There was a story today, because people are developing algorithms for security, quantum computing. They kind of have a whole series of tests, and with one of the algorithms, someone was able to break it in about 23 hours on a small laptop.
Yes, I mean, I think the security problem is going to be, it's one that's a very active area of interest at the moment. And then quantum plus AI, now that's a thought.
On that note.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's right. On that note, it was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much indeed. And also the amount of interest that it generated here and the discussion was precisely what we had in mind when we came up with the idea of, mainly Dick came up with the idea of the Lunar Society. So, we do value all of the questions that come from you, so thank you very much for what you've got. But, please, can you show your gratitude to a wonderful presentation to Carol? Thank you very much.